Hi everyone, and welcome to our Instagram Live, and the topic today is negotiating in the midst of a crisis. I'm Debbie Wosskow and I'm the co-founder of AllBright, and what I'm going to try and do today is to shed some light on some of the topics that I've been negotiating on over the last few weeks, and also trying to give you a framework for how to negotiate in really difficult circumstances. Plus take some questions that we've already received from people who have been sending them in, and keep them coming. So when we think about negotiation, I think the first thing that most of us reference or that comes to mind is money. And until recently in the business world, the majority of the negotiations that I have had fall into that category. But over the last few weeks, the landscape has changed completely, and you might find yourself negotiating in all sorts of different circumstances. Salaries are decreasing often rather than increasing. Periods of unpaid leave are being offered by employers, or perhaps even your own monthly rent payments. So to give you a sense of my reality and AllBright's reality at the moment, to keep it real, over the last few days, I have negotiated with banks. I have negotiated with our landlords for the clubs, with utility providers, with suppliers, and each conversation requires a really different level of understanding, an appreciation of the place that the other party is in, and we'll come back to that later, and also a general awareness that we are all going through this storm together. But negotiating in a crisis can often feel, frankly, like you are stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I have felt like that often over the last few weeks. But there's a saying that I want everybody listening to this to remember when they're considering a negotiation, which is, if you don't ask, you don't get. So bear that in mind. What I'm going to do before I get into the theory of how to negotiate is to try and cover off some COVID-19 specific examples of situations that people might be finding themselves in at the moment. And the one thing that I want you to remember is that although these are exceptional times, although these are exceptional circumstances, almost everybody has been negotiating in some way, in some shape or form over the last few weeks, but we all need to remember our humanity and the humanity of others at this time. So please do share any questions you'd like me to cover in the comments below. I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you what we have been working through in terms of difficult situations that are related to COVID-19. So I'm going to share a stat with you to start with. Professor Linda Badcock, who's a professor of economics at Carnegie Mellon University, and she wrote a fantastic book called Women Don't Ask, to my earlier point. And she found that when women, when they enter negotiations, on average, ask for 30% less than men ask for. And there hasn't been a day in the last 20 years of my career as a founder where I haven't been involved in some sort of negotiation. And it's not always about the big asks, but it's often about the small ones too. The only way to learn effective negotiation skills is to practice. And a failed negotiation can often teach you much more than a successful one. And it's really easy to see negotiations as a situation where there's a winner and a loser. But I think that's quite a macho way of looking at the process. A truly successful negotiation is one where every party feels like they have won. At the moment, it is, in all honesty, less about winning and more about finding a way that feels fair, or at least protects you and yourself. And the kinds of negotiations that we're all having at the moment can be space at the table, kitchen table with your flatmates, or you're getting your laptop back from your children, which is something that I've been having to do a lot in between their Google lessons. So what is it that business owners and employees are negotiating on at the moment? Things like loans, specifically in the UK, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, private renters worried about their rent, employees who are being furloughed. How do you negotiate with your employer? Negotiating for fewer hours, working from home. It's just a drop in the ocean. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that you have got options and you can take part in the conversation and decisions being made around you. Now, let's try and put in place some rules of engagement and how you can negotiate effectively. In the midst of a crisis, I've got a couple of caveats to offer up for you. The first is have empathy. Almost everyone is going through something right now. And no matter how fraught your situation, you need to remember that. And that's sometimes hard. I can struggle with that. And it's also, I'm afraid, to speak candidly, as I always do, it's fair to assume that you have got less room to negotiate right now. We have got less room to negotiate with our investors on deals, and because everybody knows that we are in exceptional circumstances. So you more than ever need to consider whether what you are asking for is reasonable. So what's the key? It is, as we always say at AllBright, practice, practice, practice. For those of you who haven't read our book, I would recommend it. Obviously, chapter 10 is all about the art of negotiation. You've got to think of it as a battle plan. You need to plot out your points. Anna and I do this all the time, and really get your head around the counter arguments that are going to come your way, and make sure that what you are asking for is clear and delivered with impact. So a really practical way of approaching this is to make a list. And it's something that we still do no matter how big the negotiation is. What do you need to get? What do you need to get out of the negotiation? What are you aiming for? What's the most basic outcome that you would be happy to accept? So what's your base case? Make a note of that. Where's your cutoff point? Write it down, think about it and write it down, because if you haven't gone in with that in your mind, you are not going to succeed. What pushback do you expect to receive? So if you were sitting on the other side of the table, try and write out the responses that you might expect from the person that you're negotiating with, and then work through your responses to their pushback. So do that work and take a good step back whilst you're preparing and ask yourself, is what I'm asking for reasonable? And now, more than ever, you need to work out whether it is preferable to bring negotiations to a swift end or to drag them out in a way that might get you a slightly better deal. So one of the really critical factors in any negotiation right now is the time value of money, or the money value of time. In other words, is it better to get a quick deal rather than the perfect deal? And in the middle of a global pandemic, there are multiple factors at play. Do bear in mind that whilst Anna and I prepare, and we always say prepare with one another, prepare with your sisterhood works. You know, it's very AllBright mantra, but it's true. You can't always control what will happen in a negotiation. So point number 2, big point, is embrace the fact that sometimes the conversation is going to be uncomfortable. Now, a negotiation right now has the propensity to be quite fraught, and it's going to lead you into your discomfort zone. But there's a big difference between feeling uncomfortable and being aggressive, especially right now. Try to find the common ground and some sort of point of mutual empathy or understanding and move forward from there. Do not be on the attack. Whether you are negotiating with your landlord for rent relief or your employer as they make changes to working patterns, as so many employers are having to do right now, it's not going to be easy. And appreciate that decisions are often being made for the survival of the business and organisations everywhere. And as an employer myself, I can tell you that sometimes those horrible decisions are necessary, and they're not taken lightly. But the best thing that you can do on the other side of the table is to be very open-minded, mindful, calm, appreciate the other person's perspective, but approach that conversation having planned and practiced the points you need to deliver. It is also, as a sort of caveat and piece of homework, particularly at the moment, worth looking up what your legal rights are. So to really understand, particularly if you're talking about money or contracts or payments, where you stand. And finally, and really crucially, listen. When Anna and I were writing the book, we interviewed an expert hostage negotiator to get her to talk about the principles of a successful negotiation. And she had negotiated with everybody from warlords to Somali pirates, so she absolutely knew her stuff. And one of the most poignant things she said was about listening. Most people approach a negotiation with a very preconceived agenda in their mind. And if you've got a list of the things that you want to get out of a negotiation, the chances are so is the other person. So whilst you're busy prepping to deliver your next point number 4 on the list, for example, you're not really listening to what the other person is saying, and that can lead you to jump to conclusions. So the minute you stop listening, the negotiation has failed. Right, that's the starter for 10. Let me try and work through some real life situations for you. We've got some questions that have come in on WhatsApp here. Let me just get them up. Okay, the first one is as follows. I struggle to get my voice heard with my boss. How can you negotiate what you think is right for your role with your boss? Well, I think, again, it's coming back to this principle of preparation, empathy and listening. So, what might the conversation be with your boss? Sometimes it's about money or promotion or the confidence to be heard or to make a point. Really make sure that you've prepped not just the point in advance, but that trick of trying to put yourself in your boss's shoes and walk around in them before you deliver it. And also pick your moment. Having run businesses for the last 20 years, it's sometimes difficult for members of the team to get time on their own with me. If somebody writes and asks, and says that they want to see me, they've got my attention. But that also means that they better deliver the point that they want to make confidently and with empathy when they do that. So preparation, put yourself in your boss's shoes and realize that generally you've got one chance to land the ask. Next question. Before the corona crisis, I was interviewing for a new job and I got offered one just as it all kicked off. My company is really under pressure right now, but my new company are requesting a reference. How do I do this without looking insensitive? It's a difficult time, isn't it? But to come back to this point on empathy, and in my experience of being a boss and running businesses for such a long time, I think that what bosses are really in need of right now is real talk actually from their team. And I think that what a lot of us are having to do is look so carefully at costs, and we're trying so hard to preserve morale and a team structure that actually I think it wouldn't be insensitive as long as it's framed in the right way. Because I think that what you might find is it provides your employer with an opportunity actually to look at a restructure or think about how they might take costs out. But as ever, it's all about how you approach it. So I think framing it as, I know that we're all going through really difficult times. I know that you're really looking at the cost base. Actually, this opportunity has come up for me. And I think that it's something that I want to do, but I think it would also be the right thing for the business. How can we work together on this? So, framing it as a mutual conversation, but trying to put yourself in your boss's shoes, that right now what everybody is focused on is cost. Next question. My salary has been cut. Whilst I obviously understand the need to do this, I would also like to reduce my hours. How can I negotiate this? And how do I make that happen? Look, this is super hard. And at the moment in the UK, what employers have been offered is an opportunity to furlough our team, which is a technical term that nobody understood until 2 weeks ago, but basically meant that we could put people on hold, but they still earn up to 80% of their salary up to a certain level. We're also having to look at things like pay cuts and sometimes hour cuts as well. I think this is one where you've got to be really sensitive to the fact that what bosses are trying to do is their best, actually, and to make sure that everybody gets paid. However, back to the previous point, if proactively you are offering up to work less time, then I think that that's something that our boss will entertain. But as ever, there would have to be at the moment, I think, a quid pro quo, which is less time for less money. And I think that's back to that point of thinking about what you really want actually right now, because the one thing that people have quite a lot of at the moment is time, because we're not having to commute. However, really holding on to what is most important to you and for you, and making the case for that in a way that shows empathy for your boss is the right approach. At the moment, there aren't many jobs out there. If I have a job offer, but the salary isn't quite high enough, how can I negotiate this time? Again, I think it's a bit pick your moment. And I think what everybody is trying to do is to keep businesses together until we reach an inflection point when, God willing, life is back to normal. So the way that I would approach that would be to be very pragmatic about the now, but to focus on how things might shift in the future, because I think that that's the right negotiation to have. And the future point, I think, is when the world is open for business again. So saying, I'm happy with this now, but can we look to address it in this way at this time in the future? I think it would be the right approach. I think what's difficult at the moment is to go in hard asking for more, because you don't want to end up with nothing. So again, try to frame it in terms of the fact that we're living in exceptional circumstances, and that what bosses are looking for are people who are able to flex with that. But I think it's right and appropriate to ask for more when there is more. What if I was due a pay rise or job promotion during this time? Can I still ask? Again, it's sort of all the same stuff, isn't it? And I can't speak for every business, but I know a lot of business owners, and everybody is struggling right now. And I think pay rises are not something that is on the agenda right now. But people who come in to negotiate in a very business focused way. And I think that's the thing. And there's sort of a separate point here around negotiating for pay rises. And there's a related question that's just come in about, are there any no-nos in a negotiation? We do a lot of this in the book about how to ask for a pay rise. So I tell you how not to ask for a pay rise, and then I'll tell you the sort of route that makes it very hard for someone to say no. So I think when you go in to ask for a pay rise and it's very personal, and you say, I need this money to do one of the following: get married, buy a house, whatever. I need the money, or so-and-so's had a pay rise and so I want one too. And I think that doesn't generally work. What does work is to go in and say, over the last 6 months, I've delivered X, 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 and X for the business. Over the next 6 months, my focus is on X, Y, and Z. I'm so excited about building this together. And consequently, because I've delivered X additional revenue for the business, I would like a pay rise of Y, right? That's the right way to do it. And we give loads of exercises on how to practice it. Makes it very hard for your boss to say no, because you're flagging what it is that you have done to make a difference to the business, rather than what the business needs to do to make a difference to you. Now, all bets are a bit blinking off at the moment, to be quite honest, because somebody could come in and very elegantly try to negotiate why they deserve to be paid more, and there just isn't anymore right now. But I think it's back to that point that when life is back to normal, what bosses will look for are people who have been with them on the bus, who have tried their best, who have delivered for the business, who have sought out some of the tough shit that we're all having to. And those are the people that you want to pay more, that you want to promote, that you want to give more equity to, which again, depending on the type of business that you work in, is a real tool that bosses want and have at their fingertips when they don't always have money. Which is, how can I tie this team together? How can I make sure that we know when life is back to normal, we're still heading for this common goal? So remember that there are lots of different metrics, and whilst what you might want is just more money in the bank at the end of the month, every month, sometimes that isn't possible. And there are other levers that you can look at and think about. I have my kids at home at the moment, but my employer expects me to work hours as normal. How do I negotiate my hours over this time? I mean, God, this is such a minefield. And something that it's a separate Instagram live really on how do you work when you've got your kids at home. Particularly mine have broken up from school today for 3 weeks of Easter holiday, and it's absolutely horrific to work out how we're going to do this, that we're all doing the Zooms and the Teams and the lives, and then with kids running around. Again, I think at the moment what there is just a recognition that we're all doing our best. And actually, I can see a child in the corner of the room over there. If people's kids pop up in calls, it's fine. If people's pets pop up in calls, it's fine. If people say, I can't do this at this time, because it's fine. I think actually what we're finding is, to the very beginning of my points on this topic, a real empathy for one another. Now, how do I negotiate my hours over this time? I think it's about being upfront about the things that you need to do and when you need to do them. But it's also recognizing that at the moment, for a lot of people, what we want is a bit of work in order to take our minds off what's happening in the universe or dealing with some of this stuff. But it's not the same. How can it be the same sitting in an office when we're all there to do one thing? And I think you will find tremendous empathy with bosses, many of whom are going through the same thing. Are there any big no-nos when it comes to negotiation, and what's the worst thing that you can do? I think it's that me. That lands really badly. And also, and often this is difficult, isn't it? Try to keep emotion out of a negotiation. And again, it's something that we talk about in the book, that we know that women can struggle with, that we have struggled with at different times in our careers. For me, the thing that takes emotion out of anything in a work context is practice. I think if you have really practiced in advance what you're going to say, if you've looked in the mirror and practiced it, if you've practiced it with your sisterhood, if you've practiced it with a critical audience, if you've really practiced it, you have to behave as if you were delivering it to a friend rather than in a high pressure situation. So, we're all human, but I think that you really want to make sure that in as much as possible, this is an emotionally neutral conversation. But go back to empathy, go back to what the ask is, think about the different levers that you have to pull. How do you deal with a lack of response or silence after a negotiation? I mean, that's really hard. And I have to say that it's quite a good tactic on behalf of the person that you're negotiating with, because it's difficult to respond to other than nudging and poking and going again. And I think particularly at the moment, if I reflect on our own life running AllBright, where there are lots of money conversations going on around funding and fundraising in the future and the clubs, and that we want to know now. And actually, that's just very much who we are and how we are. And sometimes that's not always helpful. Anna and I always joke that if we haven't had a response to an email from someone within about 2 hours, we think that they've died. So, sometimes you just have to learn the power of silence, the art of waiting. However, if you are negotiating around a topic that needs an immediate response, as a lot of them do at the moment, then I think you need to keep pushing politely. And one thing that I have really had to learn as a skill, because I tend to be quite kind of, I like to take things quite head on, and Anna's much more sort of soft power, and she doesn't always just attack an issue in a sort of blunt way, and I can be quite blunt, is that there are different ways of chasing and there are different ways of checking in, and you don't always have to say, have you thought about it yet, or do you have an answer? So I think try and sort of flex approach and be soft, and don't be afraid to be soft as well as be direct. That's been a big life lesson for me. As an employer, can you share your thoughts on when you might be more receptive about welcoming a pay rise negotiation and when the time is right? It sort of ties to my earlier point, which is have evidence to demonstrate. So do it off the back of the big win, the big moment, I wouldn't worry too much about, depending on what industry you work in. Obviously, if you're an investment banker, it's slightly different because there is a time of year and that's it. But if you're working in a more fluid way, in a more fluid industry, then pick your moment when you've got something to shout about, and make sure that you are going in, putting yourself in your boss's shoes and talking about what you have delivered for the business and what you want to deliver for the business in the future. And that makes it very hard for someone to say no.